tonight we're going to be unpacking what we're calling the space data gold rush. Everyone knows the classic space story, rockets, satellites, astronauts, but there's a quieter story unfolding, and it's all about the data layer in orbit. Space isn't just about exploration anymore. It's becoming infrastructure, a network of machines, sensors, and autonomous systems that feed information back to Earth. Whoever controls the data layer controls entire industries, defense, climate, agriculture, and logistics. The three people with me here tonight aren't just talking about the future, they are actively building it. First up, we have Dennis Wingo. Dennis is the founder of Spacebilt, leading in-space assembly and manufacturing. He's a spaceflight pioneer with foundational patents in space-certified avionics, computing, and storage, and was the architect behind Northrop Grumman's commercial satellite servicing business. His work has consistently pushed the boundaries of what's possible for orbital infrastructure, autonomy, and in-space industrialization. Everyone give a warm welcome. Do you want to give a little?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Welcome to the future.
Awesome. Next up, we've got Ghonhee. Ghonhee's a GNC engineer, the founder of Katalyst Space Technologies. He's currently building an autonomous robotic fleet of geospacecraft to perform in-space satellite upgrades, on-orbit responsive intelligence gathering, and reactive repositioning services. His team is backed by AFWorks, TAC5, and NASA.
Hey y'all, I like space robots and I'm happy to be here.
And he says y'all.
From Texas.
Awesome. And lastly, we have James Schalkwyk. James is the founder of Azora Space, a Techstar-backed company building the infrastructure to democratize and monetize space data. Azora is taking one of the hardest challenges in the industry, transforming the flood of orbital data into actionable intelligence. His company is defining the architecture for how space data gets processed, distributed, and valued across both commercial and government sectors. Dennis, Ghonhee, James, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's dive in. All right, Ghonhee, the first question is going to be directed towards you. SpaceX just acquired Spectrum for direct-to-device comms. Starshield is hardening constellations for contested environments. The new reality is anti-jam, anti-spoof encrypted systems. As you retrofit in-orbit systems that were designed to never be touched again, what capabilities are you adding that weren't economically viable at launch, and how does that reshape the value prop for defense customers?
Yeah, that's a great question. That just gets right into it. Cold start.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. So I think if you look at the space environment, historically we've only gone to space for the things that we couldn't do on Earth, right? And that's meant generating data for remote sensing, taking pictures of the Earth, or moving data around for satellite communications. And those are historically the only areas that you could make money in because that's like the final frontier, the only reason that you would go to the extreme to make that happen. Well, now we're seeing much more proliferation of space objects. We're seeing both governments realize that the intelligence aspect of space is very important, and this infrastructure is very vulnerable. So one of the first things that we're doing is our goal at Katalyst Space is to build out this fleet of robotic servicing spacecraft that can go out and do many things. Some of those types of things are adding payloads to spacecraft that were never designed to be serviced. So if you have a large multi-ton, multi-$100 million, $500 million space vehicle out in geosynchronous orbit, and you're the US government, and this thing was designed to last for 15 years, it might have been designed in an environment that looks like nothing like it does today. And so one of the things that we're doing is we have a mission with the US government, the Space Force specifically, to add a sensor package, retrofitting a sensor package onto an existing Space Force satellite in 2027. This sensor package comes with its own power and data link to the ground, because if you think about it, there's no USB port on a satellite, right? And there's always been this chicken or egg problem with many of these types of applications saying, if we only had the infrastructure, then we'd be able to have this brand new architecture that is so forward thinking. And we think that it's very important to start with showing the value proposition, showing both the resiliency of adding capabilities to satellites, but also monetizing some of the data. That data is very important. It's really important to know what's going on in the space domain, and you might be able to combine it with other data sources to be able to sell it to other governments, other commercial satellite organizations, to be able to help manage their fleets. So we're starting with retrofitting these sensors, showing the value proposition of on-orbit upgrades, using that to deploy the infrastructure, and then helping this virtuous cycle get off the ground.
Awesome, that's super interesting. I also want to build a little bit more on that. What makes RPOD critical infrastructure for swarm coordination, or is it just a servicing play?
Sure. I mean, Dennis probably has a lot of comments here, but if you think about it, historically, we have really struggled to increase the frequency of bringing multiple objects close together in space. We've shown that it's technically possible. We've been going up and doing spacewalks. We've been docking the command module with the lander around the moon during the Apollo days. We had the Hubble spacecraft servicing missions, and we had the International Space Station. All of these required humans in the loop, extraordinary, like, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars programs to pull this off, right? And so the most complex aspect of space is bringing two objects together. If you can make that more routine, if you can make that more of a commodity, just like how SpaceX operationalized and mastered this high-risk maneuver of landing the rocket, you can totally change the economics of space. You can build giant space telescopes, right? We measure these things in terms of the aperture diameter of a space telescope in the span of centimeters. Well, if you use a fleet of robots that are docking together all the time to put together a kilometer-sized aperture, what can you do then, right? So think when it comes to rendezvous, proximity operations, and docking, right? RPOD, that is one of the foundational technologies that we need to figure out how to replicate on a commercial scale, just like we did when it comes to building, like, you know, B2B SaaS applications, where we just figured out this, you know, core technology as infrastructure instead of every organization having to go out and build it, right? That would be a total game changer, so that's why we're so heavily investing in it.
Just don't call it a target.
Anything else you want to add?
Just literally when you're in investment meetings and in government meetings, we swore never to use the word target. Words are important. We used a parent and child relationship to bring the two together for a cooperative system. You won't believe how important the use of words are, because you trigger certain people with certain words, and even though you're doing something super virtuous, if they hear the word target, oh, you're military, you're trying to destroy things. It's a parent and a child.
Awesome, that's great insight. James, we're going to move to you next. The market doesn't want more pretty images of the Earth. It wants decisions for ISR, climate, agriculture, logistics, and maritime operations. How does the intersection of optical, hyperspectral, and advanced sensors and in-orbit processing change the value proposition for space data for commercial and government customers?
You're reminding me that my former Air Force boss, my Air Force general boss, also said, forbid the use of the color red in any document.
Red makes you mad.
Red makes you mad, exactly. Okay, so you're kind of, this is a bit of a leading question. I think it's the jury's not totally out on beautiful space images yet. But I do think this is a great place to start when thinking about space data, because we talk about the space data bottleneck a lot, and it's not really one problem. It's kind of a multi-headed beast, I think, and it really depends on who you're talking to. So the classic ones are, we think a lot about high throughput, how do we get all of that data in space back down to Earth? But as you said, latency is the sort of word of the day, especially for Earth observation companies, right? What they really want is to get insights into the hands of operators, within minutes now of actually taking that data. There's a defense term, speed of relevance, right? You want that data quick enough to make a decision. But then hovering kind of over those two things, I think, in the space data sort of challenge areas is resilience. So this is a big buzzword now in the DoD. You want systems that are resilient to attack, that are resilient to malfunction, and you also want security, right? So you want to be able to send data down to Earth and make sure that you know exactly who it's going to. Because right now, right, you could sit with an antenna in Delaware, and you can receive like the NRO signals. Now they're encrypted; you can't necessarily decipher them today.
Unless you have quantum.
I mean, this is exactly it. So the quantum that is real, and it may very well be that the solution to that is not more quantum and more software, but is really the physical layer. And then finally, I think everybody understands that the regulatory environment is just getting more complicated. So I sort of think of that as the fifth piece of the kind of comms challenge, is how do we get into a world where getting a signed spectrum doesn't take 18 months, and where we aren't all increasingly fighting over this limited resource. So, wait a minute, what was your question again?
The opening remarks are hard, right?
Yeah, great opening remarks. Okay, so the question was, how does the intersection of optical, hyperspectral, and advanced sensors and on-orbit processing change the value proposition of space data for commercial and government customers?
Absolutely. Okay, so this is why I went down this rabbit hole, right? Because latency is such a big issue for so many customers. So we're just so you all know, we're building optical ground stations. We are trying to build a true infrastructure that enables this technology, that gets people over the sort of scare factor of the clouds, and we think the only way to do that is to sort of a proliferation at an enormous scale. So literally thousands of stations that are as cheap and kind of easily deployable as your sort of your dish for your satellite TV. Until that, so that I think coupled with intersatellite links starts becoming a really, really exciting opportunity for high throughput and low latency comms. So if you have a world in which you have satellite networks that can talk amongst each other at tens or hundreds of gigabits per second, potentially even amongst different networks, which is an interesting topic I'm sure you'll touch on, Dennis, and then can downlink kind of reactively anywhere on Earth, we start solving a lot of the problems that I described. Now, I don't think optical is kind of a panacea, but you solve a lot of the security problems. The proliferation allows you to have this resilience and redundancy that the defense customers are looking for. And you get high throughput for those people who still do want those beautiful pictures. And the hyperspectral, there are still folks who are struggling to get even a single image down or in a pass, right? Whether you're doing hyperspectral or a number of other sensing techniques.
Can I add on to that real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
So just like James was saying, I think that the integration of a lot of these data pieces is key to unlocking the actual market opportunity and the usability of these data plays. If you think about the four main segments of space data, right, I would put together a framework where there is GNSS or PNT, right, position, navigation, and timing, things like GPS, right? There is things like satcom, right? Then there's ISR or remote sensing, right, taking pictures of the Earth and different phenomenologies. And then lastly, space domain awareness, space situational awareness, taking pictures of other satellites, trying to understand what's going on. And if you break that down between provider, so is it the government or commercial providing that, right? User or consumer, is it dual use, government only primarily, or is it commercial primarily? And then TAM, right, as the third piece of this. It's pretty interesting what you see, right? By far and large, you've got the PNT group with like $300 billion of TAM, right? And it's almost exclusively a government-provided endeavor, right? You've got our constellation in the US, right, the GPS constellation, that's just beaming out signals for free. And then you've got like SATCOM at the next layer, about $100 billion. That's mostly commercially provided, right? You've got old school companies like Viasat, right? And Intelsat and Hughes and those guys, right? PanAmSat. And that's like $100 billion, of which 10% is SpaceX, right? They're getting about $10 billion already. But then the other two markets are just an order of magnitude smaller, right? Maybe $7 billion for remote sensing ISR and maybe $2 billion for SSA SDA, right? And you could argue, well, why is that, right? If we have all this rich data that's available for us to be able to make decisions around moving fleets around, about repositioning defensive assets, all those things, why is it not valued more, right? Well, I think that you've got like thousands of companies, from Uber to you know, your food company tracking GPS data, that's all lumped together. So is it truly a data bottleneck when it comes to the physical infrastructure, or is it a business model problem, right, to be able to leverage the data products in a way that actually allows you to grow the economy? I think the question is still out, and that's something I think we collectively need to answer.
Can I respond to your response? So yeah, so this is actually something I'm really interested in, because the way we do comms at the moment, and I think SpaceX is starting to sort of change this a little. Right, I mean, it's a little bit like dial-up. I actually made the mistake of saying dial-up to someone recently, and they were like, "What's that?" Which is kind of scary. But you know, you're scheduling downlink. You're getting some sort of amount of data once a day, multiple times a day, maybe. But in a world in which we are much more connected, like I was describing, space looks a lot more like the business we do on Earth, right? We're constantly connected to assets in space. Maybe we're uploading, you know, apps to software on satellites. And you know, just like Steve Jobs didn't kind of imagine how big the App Store was going to be, I mean, literally trillions of dollars. I think that a really fun conversation for us to have on this panel and also afterwards is like, what would happen if we could have high throughput, near constant communications with our assets in space? What does that enable?
It's pretty cool.
And use the word resilience multiple times in your presentations. It helps with the...
That's I know.
Awesome, that's great insight. All right, Dennis, we're going to come over to you now. From launching the first Macintosh in space to commercial micro data centers, what innovation does Edge AI unlock when compute moves orbital and we escape downlink bottlenecks?
It's truly transformational. And the problem has been, especially among the incumbent, let's call them the legacy defense contractors. And for example, I qualified a Power PC on the space shuttle in 1992. Literally, the big guys are still using what I qualified before a lot of you guys were born. And that's a big problem, but in terms of what we're doing now, it is truly transformational. What both these guys are saying is transformational in space to bring intelligence, to make RPOD easy. We did a lot of that work with orbital recovery that we later sold to Northrop Grumman. What you're talking about, it's called the OODA loop. There's a story, this Air Force Colonel John, I can't remember his last name, but it's increasing decision speed. And for example, I use an agricultural example because I don't want to be all this DoD shit, is a orange grove in Florida has one tree that has blight on it. If they could address that before it spread to the other trees, they would save $1 billion or hundreds of millions of dollars on their crop. How do you do that? Hyperspectral imaging. How do you do that with hyperspectral imaging? You make sure they have that data multiple times a day, because the blight can start in a tree in a day or two. And so to increase the velocity, and this is a good term to use, to increase the velocity of data is a really good thing. The Climate Corporation was sold to Monsanto because what they did is that they used existing remote sensing data to be able to get rid of insurance adjusters. And people don't even think about this now, but what used to happen, insurance adjusters used to have to go out to all the farms, but the Climate Corporation created an app to where they took Landsat data, and so they could project what the farm losses would be of a crop, and so now the farmer just gets a check. And boom, it increased the velocity. It helped the farmer. It helped the insurance company reduce losses. It is all about the velocity of data. You cannot have this velocity of data without in-space compute, without in-space storage, and it's just absolutely transformational.
Awesome, that's great to hear. And then kind of to follow up on that, you've patented avionics across multiple orbital systems. What is the choke point, whether that's power budgets, thermal management, or radiation hardening, that's throttling edge compute in LEO?
Well, I'm going to say something here because there's investors in the room. Everyone loves innovation, as long as someone's done it before. The problem right now in this sector is the investors. Is convincing investors that your compelling story is one that they can bank on because it's innovative, because it is forward-looking, because it's not proven yet. It's always easy to follow the herd. It's much easier, but as Peter Thiel talks about in 0 to 1, that's not where you make money. And so that's the biggest problem that you have, is being able to bring finance to the people that are doing the innovative work. Now, on the technical side, radiation's not the biggest problem. Thermal is. It's a much larger determinant of the overall reliability of a system than radiation. And everybody focuses on radiation. All the defense contractors focus on radiation, radiation, radiation. But the biggest problem is thermal. And just think if you were going to put a Grace Hopper GPU on a satellite, that's 700 watts in a 1 by 2 inch area. How the hell do you get that heat from that GPU to a radiator? Because it's a meter square radiator that you got to do this. These are non-trivial problems. And this is what we're working on right now.
Can I follow up? Sorry. This is a really exciting topic for me because I think data centers in space are both exciting, interesting, but also potentially a great market for us because they're going to need terabits of doubling per second. I worry about them a little because it feels like the data centers in space folks are typically data center people who think space is easy, rather than space people who think that data centers are easy or whatever. And one of the biggest things I hear from them is that space is cold.
Yeah.
And if you're in sun-synchronous orbit because you're taking advantage of near constant solar power, space is not cold.
Yeah.
Can you just talk a little about what hurdles you think that those sort of big data center people are going to have?
Yeah, the data center people right now have no idea. For example, right down here in Santa Clara, right up the street from my office, they're using 10 megawatts of power to power one data center. And 10 megawatts of power, we've never flown more than 200 kilowatts, and that's on the International Space Station, in space before on a single platform. It just hasn't happened. And Eric Schmidt and even Jeff Bezos, who's a little smarter on this stuff, they have no idea of what's going on in this sector. And they think, oh, I could just take terrestrial solar panels. No, you're not. Not for anything that has any kind of longevity. And a data center has to amortize on the side. But to flip the bit, and I talked to this because some of our investors are Texas real estate guys. And I'm going, look, my permitting process is a lot easier than yours in Dallas. So there's multiple aspects to this. Right now, our biggest problem is infrastructure and supply chain. Supply chain is everything, and we've got to, because everything is still kind of key to the legacy guys, and I'm working on a project right now, $300 million just to double the production of multi-junction solar cells. And that's just doubling the production. We need to increase production by a factor of 10 or 20. Data centers in space ain't going to happen without a 100x increase in solar cell production. And so now, what do? We work in the areas to where we can add the most value in the near term at the least amount of power. And that's what you're talking about, it's what you're talking about, what we're talking about is to get close to the sensor, to be able to provide data, and just to make one other point, the US government throws away 95% of its data. 95% of the data they generate on orbit, they throw away. In the commercial world, it's 90%. My friend Will Marshall and the guys at Planet are talking about, we got to start putting storage on our satellites. And so this is where we're at. And there's the old saying, in chaos, there's opportunity. There's a crap load of opportunity out there right now.
Awesome. Well, that's great to hear. And it's a good pivot to our next question. I'm going to open the floor to you guys.
I meant to do
You're each building critical infrastructure for the space data economy. In 18 months, what's one capability that gets deployed that makes every VC in this room wish they'd written a check today?
Multi-petabyte data centers with edge compute. We're currently funded to do that. We'll have it. I'm flying the first 200 something terabytes in July. We're flying a petabyte next year. We're flying Jetsons next year and this year. We're pushing it. We're doing it. And we're at least mostly funded to do that.
I think that this was a good topic with regards to what causes investors to actually make money in the economy, right? And one of the issues that we've had in space is cost, right? Because of the emphasis on flight heritage, because of the emphasis on resilience, we typically have had sales cycles that are 36 months, design cycles that are in like 96 plus months, right? And so overall, the cycle times become really, really slow, and the total cost of a program becomes very expensive. So if you look at this big space robot that Northrop Grumman has been building for years and years and years and years and years, known as the Mission Robotic Vehicle, they have a partnership with DARPA that has invested, what, $400 million into this.
It was built 20 years ago.
Yeah, built 20 years ago with the FRIEND program, all that good stuff.
Dude, it's using an 8-bit microprocessor.
Exactly.
It's older than you are.
That's right. So think about, like, you know, giant space robot, 8-foot long arms, the size of a Sprinter van, $800 million, right? Well, what becomes true about the world if you can build, launch, and operate a robotic spacecraft for $10 million, right? You can start pumping them out there, right? And that means that you can actually unlock the opportunities of some of these business models around servicing a data center in space, right? Installing solar panels, right? Being able to swap out H100 GPUs and processing units and things like that, right? So I think that in 18 months, we are on the cusp. There's about 5 companies that are all working to fly commercially, privately developed robotic spacecraft that are all autonomous, that are all able to operate on orbit, somewhere between the cost of $10 to $30 million a pop, right? That's pretty cool, right? We're one of those companies. We're going after a NASA Space Telescope next summer. It's about to hit the atmosphere and deorbit, right? We're going to grab it with our space robot to boost it back up, the Swift Space Telescope. We don't know if it's going to be successful, but there's 5 other companies working on missions like this. And if that happens, right, some VCs and some investors are going to look really smart, and others are going to look like they totally missed the mark.
And I've got more than you play with.
I just think that, firstly, I want to say that I think that's one of the coolest missions I've heard of recently. So I've already made my pitch for, you know, like $10,000 a pop optical transceivers on you know, every house, middle of cities. That, unfortunately, is probably a little outside the 18-month window. The infrastructure deploying that number, getting production scales is probably in the sort of 3 to 4 years. In 18 months, the thing that I think people are going to be excited about is being able to offer multi-gigabit downlink from lunar distances. So our systems are modular. We are using cosmology-grade sensors. And what we want to do is enable the Fireflies, the iSpaces, you know, the X Labs to get their 8K video down. The Artemis missions to be able to actually stream the moon landings the way they say they want to. And our system with, you know, more like a dozen stations, a really conceivable number in the near term, will be able to enable that, giving the sort of this next lunar set of missions like a real immediacy for everybody here on Earth.
At least as good as we did in 1972.
At least a little better than 10 frames per second, right?
Awesome. I'd now like to open the floor to any audience questions anyone may have. If you've got anything burning on your mind, now's the time to ask.
I can just speak. Yeah, like you mentioned the multi-gigabit download. What's the technical challenge stopping us from doing that today? What has to happen?
You mean from space?
Yeah.
There's not a, we've proved it out already. So that we've already done 100 gigabit per second downlinks on test satellites from LEO, for instance. The challenge that we see at the moment, and there's plenty of inter-satellite links being proven out, DARPA programs, SpaceX. At the moment, it's really just an infrastructure build-out. At the moment, there are just not enough ground stations capable of receiving this for it to be a viable way for satellites in LEO and beyond to downlink.
So it's a ground station problem more than a.
That's how. Right. So it's a gap in the market that our company has identified and is trying to solve. At the moment, ground stations are typically being built by basically retrofitting kind of amateur professional telescopes with sensors and adaptive optics systems. So people are taking like a $600,000 plane wave instrument and trying to kind of build a dome around it and then put a little data center next to it. And then they ship this sort of $3 million system to somebody. And KSAT, there are companies that are starting to buy them. But with the issue with the weather, having 5 or 10 or 15 of these, particularly in the sites that are currently being used, is never going to give us the coverage that people are going to need to feel that this is a reliable way of getting data down.
So how do you solve the issue of the weather transparency of the sky information that you're playing?
Sure, that's just geographic diversity.
Diversity question.
Sorry, he asks how do we solve the question of the weather? There is an MIT spin-out that is proposing using high-powered lasers to melt the clouds. If they can do it, all kudos to
I
them.
was not talking about clouds, I'm talking about the atmospheric turbulences and the fact that
I see. I've got an astronomer on my hands here. Very, very dangerous. So our system. So again, when you look at the systems that are typically being deployed today, they are 60 centimeters to a meter, and you're right. At that size, you have a major atmosphere problem. People are typically using complex adaptive optics. There's a company called Kylabs that has a pretty unique, I don't know if you know it, a pretty unique kind of multi-mode splitter and recombiner. Our plan is to use no aperture bigger than 10 centimeters. So we are below free length in most cases, and we can just use tip tilt and adaptive optics. And then when we need more sensitivity, we combine in the background on a paper. Patent pending.
I was wondering what you think is missing today from the infrastructure to enable at scale in-space manufacturing as an application.
Yeah. Well, depends on what you talk about for manufacturing. A lot of people many years ago was talking about making silicon chips in space. And ISAM, which is in-space assembly and manufacturing, is more like final assembly. My first patent was on a foam packaging methodology to reduce launch loads to carry pieces up to space for assembly. And so, in my opinion, that assembly, final assembly, is a much easier hill to climb than to 3D print and do all this other stuff, because you still got to take everything up. And at the end of the day, it's about surviving launch loads. But with what SpaceX and Blue Origin are doing with large volume launch vehicles, and both Blue Origin and SpaceX vehicles are volume limited, they're not mass limited. And so being able to get stuff up there, being able to do it at a good price, and being able to move forward, we're going to be able to build some revolutionary systems. I did a study for DARPA over 20 years ago, and literally the study was, where does the giggle factor go infinite for building an owned orbit assembled telescope? And we figured out we could build a 50-meter in diameter optical diffraction limited telescope in geosynchronous orbit with the technology we had 20 years ago that would give us 1 meter resolution on the ground from geo orbit. And the fun part was the National Reconnaissance Organization said, you can't look at the Earth like that. So I told Tony Tether, who was the head of DARPA at the time, well, we'll just turn it around and we'll put pixels on continents of Earth-like planets 300 light years out. So we are, today, we're not technology limited, we're vision limited in terms of what we can do. And I've known Elon since he started SpaceX. I've known Gwen since before SpaceX was started. They laughed at Gwen when she announced reusability of the Falcon 9 stage. But they did it. They didn't listen to people, they did it. They transformed the world with that. Today, that's the issue. It's vision and people willing to take It's the difference between actual risk and perceived risk. And that's where money is made.
If I can chime in on that real quick, I agree with everything that Dennis has said. Practically speaking, though, I think the biggest gap is in the connective tissue, right? Terrestrially, when you want to go build something, right? You want to go build a data center, you want to go put up some windmills, right? Whatever it is, new real estate development. You have all these supply chain contractors, delivery, logistics providers, all those things. You got a number of companies that you can pick from so you can quickly react, right? We've shown that the entire chain, like Dennis said, ISAM, we can move robots around, we can grab onto things, that's servicing, right? We can bolt things together, that's assembly. Manufacturing is maybe melting down lunar regolith, right, to extract helium-3 or synthesize aluminum or whatever it is, right? You can technically do all of those pieces, right? But the problem is science experiment is showing that the technology works, right? Manufacturing something for economic benefit and human benefit requires this entire coordination of multiple players, and I think the missing link is just multi-mission, multi-purpose infrastructure that actually connects the dots between those things. And I think that that is a challenge because it's very difficult from an investment thesis to justify the market risk and the perceived technical risk along the way. So I think that's something that we all have to work on.
So you're talking about supply chain risks in space, manufacturing risks in space, and you talked about how SpaceX has done wonders for the ecosystem, but they've created a culture of design everything in-house. From your unique vantage point, how do you see the new space industry, which is only raising tens, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars to build satellites, building in-house versus outsourcing or buying off-the-shelf components? How do you see that earth-bound for space supply chain emerging and evolving?
No, it's a really good question, and SpaceX didn't start out that way. Here's what happened to SpaceX, is that Elon would go out, I need a flight termination receiver, and the flight termination receiver came and said, yeah, sure, we'll give you 3 units in 3 years for this amount of money. Elon's going, no, you don't understand, I want to launch 100 rockets. Well, you can't do that. and so that kind of built, after that happened to him 3 or 4 or 5 times, he said, fuck it, I'm going to do it all in-house. And so that has created, I go back to, that's what I call the Hughes model. Hughes in the 1960s was the largest aerospace company in America because they were the pioneers. They were building the first geosynchronous communication satellites, and nobody was building transponders. Nobody was building solar arrays, so they did it all in-house. So there's a natural evolution that we need, that is needed right now in infrastructure for solar cells and what we're doing for avionics and computers and stuff like that. It's evolving, and what we're doing, we're going to price our product cheaper than it costs a new upcoming team to do it themselves and give it to them faster than they can do it themselves. And so that helps them get to market quicker. And this is a natural evolution in the market, but we need money to continue to build this ecosystem and to be able to build these supply chains in all these different areas. And what you're doing to help bring these systems on orbit to be able to do, like right now, one of the things we're looking at is how do we service our vehicles? Are we going to do it ourselves, or are we going to farm it out? Right now, I want to talk to this guy and see if we can't cut a deal. That's another aspect. You know, instead of, there's the thing, how many people here have seen the movie The Highlander?
Hell yeah.
Okay, we call it the Highlander syndrome. There can be only one. And you know, Elon's got a little bit of that. But if you cooperate in an ecosystem, it's much easier for the ecosystem as a whole to move forward, and everybody, because not everybody can do A, B, or C, is to do it that way.
Do you want to chime in on that?
Well, I think this is exactly right. I mean, it's fundamental economics. Vertical integration is a market failure, right? It's a sign that there's something wrong with the market as a whole. Maybe it's that there are not enough customers. Maybe it's that a couple of people have been burned. I don't know. I think it's a big issue for all of us, frankly. And we are determined to try to do as little in-house as we possibly can. I mean, there are a couple of core components that we want to make sure we use, but I don't see the kind of capital investment in building all of our own screws and nuts and bolts seems crazy to me. I may learn otherwise, just like Rocket Lab has, and just like SpaceX has at a lot of levels. But I'm hopeful I won't have to.
My 2 cents on that question, I like that. Like we're here in the home of the tech world, right? And the software industry has just commoditized and have well-defined segments between what is the application layer, what is the service layer, what is the infrastructure layer underneath that. It's very clear, right? We have defined interfaces you can build on top of that. So you can have a very lean service company that builds a web application that's doing a very specific thing, right? And they can scale very rapidly. Space is the opposite of that. Not only is it very expensive, we keep arguing and going back and forth between what is the infrastructure layer and what is the application layer, right? And where is actually the money? So until we figure those things out and have the cooperation and the economic incentive models to actually allow us to go forward, I think we're going to continue to be in these hurdles where it's hard to raise money because it's ambiguous as far as what is required to bring this thing to market. And then as a result, people look at the market as, I don't really know if it's an investable opportunity, right? So that's definitely something that we need to address. There's a question here as well.
Yeah. Oh, actually.
You're good.
You know what?
Go.
We're totally stacked. That's
No,
good.
you're fine. You can go first.
All right.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Dennis, I have a question for you. It's a bit of a clarification as far as, are you building this infrastructure to hold terabytes of data in space for the upcoming data center economy? Or what is the business case as far as you can see for keeping data in space if over here the most important thing is actually to bring all that data down as fast as possible such that it is resilient and it's not being tapped in space? Thank you.
That's a good question. The problem we have today, and this goes back to something I said earlier, on the Govy side, they're throwing away 95% of the data. They're bringing the data down. They're not doing anything with it. On the commercial side, they're bringing 90% of the data down. They're not doing anything with it. Some of it is that, it's maybe over the Arctic or Antarctica. And for an example, we recovered 1966 images from Nimbus that showed the Arctic ice pack being at a minimum that we haven't seen in the modern era. So there's so much data out there, and what you're talking about, what we talked about earlier, using large language models that are focused. The problem I see with large language models is that they're large language models. They're trying to do everything. But just think if you had a remote sensing focused AI model that had every image that's ever been done, and you're pulling in every image that's out there, what you could do with prediction, what you could do with resilience, what you could do with a lot of this. But today, the biggest bottleneck, none of these guys have enough bandwidth to bring all their data down. And I can't tell you which company it is, but I know multiple companies that are generating gigabytes of data per second. They can't get it down, and they can't process it on orbit. But if you could process 5 gigabytes of data and come up with a 1 megabyte image or a 1 megabyte product that you could then send down that has the essential information that a customer wants. Again, I use the agricultural example of blight on a single orange tree in a large agricultural plantation. These are valuable things, but right now to kind of go back to this, processing in orbit close to the sensor is the money, in my opinion. The money shot now, and what we want to do is to enable those that are doing these types of things to be able to do it. I still, we've been recovering, and I've done this before, we recovered all the lunar images from the 1960s, reprocessed them. Even then, in the 1960s, what the American public saw and in what we did in 2009 was dramatically different. And all we did was we increased the dynamic range by a factor of 4 going back to the original data. There is an enormous amount of data that needs to be remined on the ground, but at the same time to match that in Earth, in space. And so it's an amazing what we're going to be able to do with compute and storage in space.
Awesome, and then now I'm going to hand it out to one of my co-hosts to give our concluding statement, unless you have something you want to add real quick.
Yeah, because
Well,
this is real.
At first that sounded like finding words, but I think you ended it very nicely because I agree. I think edge compute is one solution. I think on-orbit compute is one solution. I think getting all the data down is a different solution, and there are going to be different customers for whom those are essential. So I don't at all see us as sort of competing in the way that you described.
No, it is a truly new era, because one of the problems, and I just talked to Will Marshall from Planet Labs about this the other day, their new hyperspectral sensor, 35-meter resolution. You can't look at a single orange tree with 35-meter resolution. Okay, you need 3-meter resolution.
Sub 1 meter.
Yeah, well, sub 1 meter, yeah, absolutely. But the problem, you have the photon problem. I consulted with another company that was going to try to use a CubeSat to do this, and when it won't work, well, we'll just innovate. No. And this is where, when we have this capability, it starts driving the sensors. For example, Canon makes a 400 megapixel sensor. 400 megapixel. Several gigabytes per second data rate. But I can create a hyperspectral imager that is 1 meter or 3 meters or something like that for these fields. But you can't do that now because you can't get the frickin' data down, so it's not worth the money to develop. That's the gap.
This to me is a really, really important thing, because I think one of the things we're finding with Earth observation at the moment is that one of the reasons they focused on was on the latency issue, and not as much the data issue, is because they're just not launching sensors that are collecting that amount of data, because there's no point. If it's all going to get stuck up there and you can't bring it down, then why launch more sophisticated sensors?
Right.
And so I think going back to my sort of earlier question, which is like, what does the world look like when we can have 100 gigabit downlink, we have sophisticated edge compute, we have, like links. I mean, what are people launching? And it's going to be totally different from what we're launching today.